yeah, I'll post it. I'll post my link. Okay.
All right, Mr. Bernstein.
Hey guys, it's Saturday, June 29th, and it's Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox. This week, I think we're going to be talking about a couple of things, but one of them is going to be posters and learning how to make posters. And what I suggest is perhaps we can start with Paul Christy, who has a poster problem. And then after we have the problem, perhaps deal with some other problems and conundrums, and then we'll see if we can put together a bit of progress on the poster problem.
Okay, and then if we have time, I want to throw one in myself on task management. I've got some thoughts around questions about that, actually, not thoughts.
You know, to talk up front, I don't have a document to throw on the screen and share, because before I got to that point, I went down the research path of looking at posters. My problem stated orally was I have a spreadsheet somewhere that I've got all the information to do a radiograph of a group of individuals that I'm tracking, and I wanted to bring that into a Tinderbox document and then very simply see if I could find, and I did, a Plotly version of it, and then implement that. And then I stopped, because even though there's a lot of good description about posters in the ATB ref and in the forum, I couldn't make that next step to how to create a note that had the format poster note and the template that called the Plotly code.
Okay. Is that radio plot or radial plot?
Radial with an L, sometimes called a spider chart, that sort of thing.
Okay. And can the spreadsheet be shared?
I think so. Hang on a second. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen. And is that visible?
Right.
Okay. So very simple, 10 or 12 names there and a 1 to 10 attribute for each. And using Apple's numbers, I was able to create the document that I want below that. But it locks me within numbers, and I'd rather be within Tinderbox where I can do lots of other things.
Okay, can you put the numbers sheet in the chart?
All right, in the chat, you mean?
In the chat, yes. Treasure and talent.
Yep, time, treasure, and talent.
Right.
Actually, I'm not sure how to do that. Do I?
I think if you just drag the file into the chat, it will now let us do this.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to stop sharing.
Hey, Mr. Anderson, since we're sharing dissertations, do you have a link to yours?
Seems awfully long ago. I'll go find it. Yeah, it's in the Southampton report, e-prints. I'll put it in the chat.
It's timeless, Mark. It is timeless.
So hang on one more second. Found it. And did that accomplish it?
It does seem to have.
Okay.
Terrific. Okay, give me a little while to gather my thoughts, and I think this can be done.
Okay. So while Mark's playing around and preparing the Julia Child cooking show, maybe I can ask a question for you all. So I have a interesting challenge. Let me open up my Tinderbox file. Which one? Okay. So I have an interesting challenge of I'm trying to manage tasks. And I wanted to throw some ideas around with all of you to figure out, like, and Mr. Anderson and I talked about this the best. So let me share my screen here. All right, so I have a Tinderbox file, and I'm trying, let me get this out of the way. Come on. All right, so I'm trying to, so I've got a bunch of tasks and I'm trying to manage those tasks. And one of my issues with the tasks is I've got tons of different projects I'm working on. And so I'm trying to find an efficient way of populating things like, see, I haven't done it for a lot of them. I'll close these and show you the demos. Populating things like the client and the project field and such. And I've been thinking about a couple of ways to do that. One way would be to create smart adornments. So if I go to a map, and I create it, let's say I create an adornment, and then on the adornment, I can have an on ad that would say something like client equals client, and then adornment. And then if I add the word client to this adornment, and let's say I'll call the client is Eastgate. Right, but the challenge I'm having is I find doing this kind of task management in prototype equal proto equals I find so if I create a task and I drag it on there, whoops, well, I should have done it. Call up. I see why I didn't give it a name. All right, let's do it this way. And let's say, so I'll double click on the adornment, give it a name, and you'll see instantly it adds the prototype task and it makes the client Eastgate. So I was thinking I could, and I probably will in some instances, create a bunch of smart adornments that let me just kind of double click on this adornment to create a task. But I personally find, God, the screen is non-responsive. I find, so I could call this one like Project Eastgate. So I could have a big map view that would show all of my my different projects. And then when I wanted to create tasks for projects, I could just double click on that adornment and then pre-populate some of those fields. I found that kind of annoying. In map view, it's okay, but it's not very efficient for me. So the other thing I was thinking about, and I wanted to run your ideas on it, is a similar but different methodology might be to have a container called add task list adornment from and just an idea of using the list view, but a same strategy. So I could have a container called task, military connect. I could have a container called task Eastgate. And I was wondering if any of you had any, just double click on this so we can see make the quick changes. And this time I'm going to make the client here Eastgate. So then if I added to that, I get that. So I'm thinking this might be a way to, pre-populate tasks, and then I could create a rule that says like move the tasks into the relevant project folder. So I could then have project names here, and I could say, maybe this is the doctorate project. And so then the rule would then move that task out of this kind of on ad triage space into that particular project. And then I could use agents and stuff to discover other tasks. Can anybody think of a more efficient way to do this?
How
But
about,
the goal, sorry, go
I'm thinking simple. Have prototypes for each project, have a note for each project with the on add to assign the related prototype to any children of that project note.
Okay,
Is
say that
that-
again. So you're suggesting have a task prototype for every project.
Correct.
Okay.
And a prototype could inherit from another prototype, like a project prototype, and then under the prototype have it inherit some things from the project, but have the client prototype would have some of its own values, and then have a note which represents that project with an on add
Yeah.
that assigns that client prototype to it. That's sort of going old school. Not
Yeah, but that's a good idea. My only concern with that is prototype bloat. Right. In that I have one prototype called task. And I probably have 30, 40 different projects going on. So that would mean 30, 40 similar but slightly different prototypes. But I'll think about that one.
well.
Anybody?
One of the philosophical ideas is everything is a note, and prototypes are a special kind of note. So tell me about what the problems are with prototype bloat, because it would seem to be similar to just having lots of notes.
On the offhand, it's just needing to, to your point, the way to make that would work, you'd have to have that prototype be part of a prototype. So if I fundamentally, I'd have a base prototype called task, and that one would be the one I'd use if I wanted to change, change the base way I want the task to work, so that it would propagate against all of the other 40 odd project task related prototypes. That could work. And presumably similar idea, you do that for every project. And that's it's slightly no different than the strategy that you're seeing on here. I could similarly do that. I could create another subgroup underneath here that for every project within the client, let's say Military Connector Eastgate, to help pre-populate some of those things. But that just seems to be a lot of little moving parts to have to keep aware of. But my conversation with Mr. Anderson was, at some point, the human needs to go in and populate these fields with a certain level of intelligence of what they want to accomplish. And that maybe there's just no getting around some of that human step. Mr. Chuck, Wade, you're looking thoughtful. Are you? And Mr. Anderson, go for it.
I just add to the point that Michael just made. One of the things I did say, and I think this comes to me the more I fiddle around, especially with other people's metadata, is that there's a lot to be said for the apparent chore of actually looking at the wretched stuff. The more you touch it, the more insight you get in a way that some clever bit of machine learning never will. Because what you tend to see is you see the fit and finish up close. You see how rough the data is. You see the inconsistency because it's only when you're looking at it and thinking where does it go that it becomes apparent that all the clever categories you designed earlier actually aren't quite the fit you wanted. So it's tiresome, but I think it pays. So I would caution against thinking that removing all sort of human touch from the process is an advantage. I suspect you pay for that. Seemingly, what's the word I'm stretching for that efficiency is actually lost because of where you will end up going back and have to fix the stuff that your automation wasn't clever enough to spot. And that's not to speak ill of the automation. It's just that sometimes stuff is just not as clean as we'd like, and it's, the human, I think, is still far better at spotting the outliers and the associative links that spawn off that than AI is. Well, I mean, it may get better, tomorrow, but today I think that's where we are.
All right, Chuck, do you have thoughts on this since you do a lot of project work?
Well, actually, the whole conversation is getting me thinking about getting back to some of the project work that I was going to be doing. I finally finished with our geothermal installation, so I'm beginning to come back to normal work these days. One comment, I guess I was just contemplative about the issue of how many prototype nodes could you have, and I was thinking back to what I was working on earlier, where I found it necessary to create a large tree of prototypes because that was the problem space I was working with, and it kind of required it. And I was trying to think, did I ever run into any problems with prototype bloat? And I don't think they were insurmountable. Again, it's something I need to get back to. My thought was that if you've got a system that calls for it, it's probably not that bad. And I was also trying to think, how many projects or clients could a single person deal with? I mean, if you're dealing with a whole organization, it could be huge, but probably at the individual level, it's not that bad. And again, the situation I was dealing with was one where I had to essentially incorporate an existing body of material, in this case, network configurations. And, the challenge was really finding ways to automate the process of importing that and getting it into the appropriate prototypes.
Yeah.
Or assigning the appropriate prototypes to basically organize it all. But I think on an individual basis, you're probably not going to have that much project bloat. So using prototypes for projects, I think to the earlier comment, is perfectly rational.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll explore that. All right, anybody else have any other thoughts or comments, projects they're working on? Thanks for walking that through with me.
I'm coming in a little bit late to this, but so I use my Tinderbox. My primary, as you guys know, is a lab notebook, but my lab notebook has several projects, and I only have like 6. I don't have 30. But I use map view, and each project is a container. So, I mean, this seems pretty obvious. So maybe this is Tinderbox 101. But if I had a bunch of projects, each one would be a container. Is that too simple for you to think about? Or
no, it's not. And I am thinking about it in that context. I like that. My challenge though is maybe it speaks to my ADHD. I don't have 6 projects right now. I have about 20. And so I'm just trying to find they're all not necessarily, and I'm trying to roll these individual, maybe I'm calling the term project wrong because I've got programs, projects, and then stuff happening within each one of those projects, or activities within each one of those projects. And I'm and I have these multiple threads of conversations happening all the time, and I don't want to necessarily have to bounce around this list of 20 projects or their activities, or even within the programs, to like find the right place to add that particular task. When I want to create a task, I just want to create it and then move on. I don't want to have to go up and down and within the tree of all my work to find the right place to place it.
but organizationally, you want to.
Yeah, no, so organizationally, you're right, Bill. I want to end up with where you're at. But in terms of the collection stage, when I'm collecting my tasks, I want to kind of throw all tasks into this like task chum bucket to be able to capture them really quickly.
My mom used to call that an everything drawer.
Yes. But then I want the everything drawer to kind of help me clean it up relatively quickly, so it doesn't become that drawer that just sits there for years and you're like, oh, so that's where that long lost last of dead batteries went.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Yeah, so really good idea.
I think, Michael, that part of the issue you're dealing with is not so much what the organizational techniques might be, but how you want to interact with those organizational techniques. You're trying to use Tinderbox as a way to facilitate cleanup operations.
Yes.
And maybe that adornment technique you started out with is a good way to do that. Bring up a map view, have a bunch of projects on the map view, and then you go into your task bucket and say, okay, this one belongs to that one belongs to that one, which is honestly, something you've probably, and many of us have probably done with things like email. I mean, we have email folders that are everything drawers. Yeah. And, every once in a while, I just go through either a semi-automated process or a manual process of dragging each one to a folder that makes sense.
That's actually a pretty good idea. And I could run an agent. I could have that map view there kind of persistently, and then have an agent on that map view as well that says, go get me all the tasks everywhere that don't have clients, that don't have projects on them. And then I would then be able to pull those aliases out of that agent for those notes and then drag them onto the associated things to label them.
Yep.
All right. That could work. I'll have to play with that. That's I like. Okay. That's another way. Yeah, Mr. Art.
Yeah, that harkens back to something that Mark Anderson presented about a year ago, I thought, where he was reviving a sorting scheme that had been developed by somebody else in an earlier version of Tinderbox. And again, I thought that was a very clever way of taking snippets from notes gathered in interview sessions and associating them with different concepts or ideas in a relatively quick way. But again, it was human sorting facilitated through Tinderbox, which is another way to look at what you're trying to do. So.
Yeah, and I think Mark's right. I mean, getting your hands dirty and getting close to the data is part of the work. It's you really can't get past that. Mr. Art, you've been dutifully having your hand up. Oh, my video's off.
Well, only to help you, Michael. Well, first of all, congrats, Dr. Michael.
Thank you.
So nice. Excellent to hear this. Okay, so I'm just trying to understand, for your task project management, your hierarchy is something like programs, and under which you have multiple projects. And then within each project, you might have an activity, which may or may not be a task. Is that so far accurate?
Yeah, kind of. But here's where I'm getting a little bit less Tinderboxy in that. So I've got, I don't necessarily nest them in a hierarchy, programs, projects, this, because I like to keep separate folders. So here's a folder with just all of the names of my programs. Here's a folder with all of the names of my projects. Here's a folder with all of my tasks. So I kind of containerize them and that's why I need the attribute values populated, because I like to kind of containerize them by their type, not necessarily just this bunch of nested mess like I have on my laptop.
Okay, and then so how do you link an individual activity or a task to a particular project
I would populate the field. Here, I'll go ahead and show you again. I would
no, that's fine. I'm just walking through this.
Populate the value in an attribute, and then I can run agents and within this file go find all of
so you collect via agents, right? Okay. So that's one point at which you are going to review or look again at that individual atomic bit of information.
Right.
Okay. Now you're creating this atomic bit of information based on 2 or 3 things. You may have a conversation with somebody, and then you have to put that note down regarding that conversation. It might just be the name of that person, or it might be some meeting that you have to organize with that person. So you drop that in as a task that needs to be done or needs to be processed further.
Yes.
Okay. Then there might also be something like you're driving down the freeway and you see a billboard, and that reminds you about some privacy issue, and you really want to get that down, but you don't know exactly where or when it's going to fit. You just know it's going to fit in this amalgamation of tasks and projects, but it doesn't yet have. All right. And now you have a third kind of data bit, which is an idea that you generate. You actually don't even know whether you'll ever use it again. In fact, you probably won't use it again. You just want to put it down somewhere so you will never look at it again, actually.
Yeah, just to get it recorded so that somewhere in my brain it's been registered.
That has been registered, right? So those are your three primary kinds of tasks, and in fact, ultimately, what you're trying to do is leverage and organize those three different types. And there might be 4 or 5, whatever, but you're trying to leverage and organize these 3 or 4 types of tasks. So for 2 things, so that they minimize the clutter in your day-to-day life, and also so that they don't clutter up against each other unless and until you want them to be linked.
Correct.
Okay, so that it would basically, all these would point me to the fact that at some point you are going to have to do human processing on each of those bits of information at some point.
At some point, but yeah,
either
Go
either
ahead.
inward or outward.
Correct, but at the point, yeah, but the challenge is like when I'm in the throes of engaging, I don't want the mechanics of having to fill out all those little attributes to like keep me from capturing those tasks, like when I'm in a meeting.
Oh, absolutely, and ultimately that is the IO flow issue that we all have. Anyone who's dealing with information is always like has got more information than they have time. It's like being a traffic cop. There's always going to be more traffic than as a traffic cop than you can handle. It's just the definition, it's the nature of information. And the more you embrace information, the more you're going to have that issue.
Right.
So ultimately, there's 2 like core points at hand. One is like there might actually be some bits of data that just belong in that chum bucket you never have to touch again. It provides the overall flavor and character of the chum bucket, but doesn't necessarily need to be something that you would pull up. And that's one place you can save a lot of energy and time. You just put a generic sort of identification or a tag to that bit of information. It drops into the bucket. You don't necessarily have to look at it unless you're doing a search through that, as Chuck was talking about, this sort of, to be done sort of bin, and then deal with it. But others are important, and you need to allocate them. So if I were in your place, I would have these 2 input buckets, and I would put one into one that says, as soon as I sit down for half an hour, so at the end of the day, I'll sort of organize all my tasks that need to be done from these atomic ideas. And then there's another one that just goes and belongs in the bucket, and I really don't have time to deal with it.
Right. Okay.
That's the direction which I would head in anyway.
Yeah, let me experiment with that. So it's less about the Tinderbox capabilities and tools, because I think I can figure that out. It's more about what you're talking about, like what is my process?
Yeah, and ultimately what you're trying to get out of it, because data is only as important as your retrieval of it.
Oh, I like that. I'm gonna have to quote you on that one. All right. Mr. Anderson.
Just quickly for those working on a single screen, so those who can see the chat will see it already, but the video that was or the project that I think it was Chuck was referring to was Tom Webster's demo that he did he first showed it in it was the Tinderbox weekend in 2009 in San Francisco, if memory serves. And he was using Tinderbox, well, he was using effectively the old pre-version 6 Tinderbox, which had multiple windows that allowed us to do things that we can't easily do now. There is a link I found to the Vimeo, which for some reason now requires you to log in. And if I'll have a dig around and I'll put a link in the forum for this meetup if I can find the document.
I actually find it. It's referenced in my dissertation.
Oh well, there you go.
I use Tinderbox for my qualitative data analysis, so I reference Tinderbox as my tool for qualitative data analysis, and I use Tom's video as my reference. So let me pull up that reference for you. And then we did one a while back with the Mark Anderson version 2 version of that. That one we should be able to pull up too.
Yeah, that's the one I need to go and look for.
Okay,
but as I say, I won't try and do it now, so I can actually listen to what people are saying. I'm sure I've got it somewhere, and when I find it, I'll link it to the thread in the forum.
There's the Vimeo one, and let me find ours. I've got it in a Tinderbox file. All right, Mr. Bill.
Hi again. In one of my prior lifetimes, I was a financial, I'll use the word executive, and in charge of a department, and we had to keep records. This is paper filing. For accountants love paper. And they'd sort their invoices. They generally have, maybe it was alphabetical, or maybe it was by vendor, whoever it was. And then these people, when I come into this company, they have a miscellaneous folder. So something's in, by AT&T and Apple, and then they'd have some folder MISC, and it would be impossible to find anything. You want to go back and find something, it'd be in that leftover file that wasn't so important. They didn't bother organizing it specifically. And it's one of the things I completely got rid of. No, for organizing papers that you need to find someday, no miscellaneous folders. I outlawed them.
Yeah.
And it just seems to come in context with what we're talking about here. I'd be careful about dumping stuff into a file of a container of not so critical stuff and just leaving it all let sit there. I think it's better it's like my goal of emptying my inbox rather than having everything that's not too important just sit there. So I just sharing that perspective. I'd want to have everything organized, not just the most important stuff.
Yeah, I agree. It gives me terrible anxiety when it's not, because you end up, and I really want to focus more on the strategic process, because then the tactics will follow. But you're right, when you don't and then one of the strategies is don't have a chum bucket, don't have that drawer where shit just gets thrown into it and you never look again, because
Right.
that creates a lot of problems.
Well, not to contradict you guys, but I mean, at the same point, you're going to have a conflict of all this against time. And at the end of the day, I mean, we can all recognize that the most important thing we have is time. More important than money, it's more important than our data being organized. So ultimately, what are you spending that time on, and is it worth the information that's being yielded? I am sure that I have tons of information that I'll never look at again that I've put into Tinderbox projects.
Yeah.
And all that is wasted time if I'm sitting to organize it. And you know what? I get more anxiety sitting around trying to organize my stuff than actually getting stuff done.
Well, so Art, I'm just kidding. That's said with
Of course.
you could never, it could be that all that stuff that you're never going to look at again, why is it in Tinderbox in the first place? Just dump it, clean it up.
Well, so that is to do with my process though, Bill, because part of my process is picking and pulling random stuff that actually probably has zero value in one context and then imbuing it with value in a different context.
Yeah, and also too, there's something to be said for the idea of incremental formalization and being able to go back 10 years and say, oh, remember that idea we had 10 years ago? That's actually relevant for me now, and it wasn't then. And
yeah, correct.
You just dump it and throw it away, it's gone.
Yeah. So if I had something interesting about, say, Tesla that I thought about 4 years ago, and I just drop it into a Tinderbox project, I don't need to organize it. Maybe 4 years later, I hadn't thought about Tesla and pigeons. I wonder what it was. And just do a search, boom, find it, then classify it, then organize it, because now it has become a valuable atomic piece of data. But until now, I have no use for it.
Yeah.
I mean, there is something to be said for relying on our memory. Like, I mean, all of us are sitting around here right now. If we're not looking at a screen that contains data, we are actually combing through our memory banks. Everything, every word we speak to each other, every concept we exchange, it all has to zip past our memory banks in order for us to deal with it.
Yeah, and before I lose the thought too, I like that. I want to go back to this relationship of the qualitative data analysis, the two videos that Mark and I just posted, in relation to the task management discussion, because qualitative data analysis and that concept is simply tagging concepts and ideas in a task or notes. There's nothing more than doing that, managing metadata. And I really liked how we made that association between qualitative data analysis and task management. So quite interesting. Mr. Eddie, your hand's been up for a while.
Yes, another issue, because you obviously freely admitted, and also the challenge of ADHD of the brain. We need the wired this way. We constantly need stimulation of new. But most of what's going on in the world is not new. And the way I hear of you trying to capture your process is something I wrestle with, and why I enjoy these meetings is a 3-tier client, project, task. In this context, you, Michael Becker, are the client. You're paying for this, efficient or inefficient, out of your time, as Art points out. So how to force yourself into a redundancy checking, repetitive process. Don't constantly reward yourself by thinking you dreamed up something new.
Yeah.
File it in the context of Art saying MISC, we don't allow MISC, a process there. Oh yeah, I'm moving too fast. I'll put it in the work in process folder. That is, if it's not empty by the end of the day, I can't go home, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that just creates a certain amount of discipline that I don't necessarily know I have yet. I know
that's
something
that's
that
my
you're-
comment on the ADA. Michael, do understand, look at my background. I am perfectly disciplined.
Yeah.
And if you believe that, I got a bridge.
To sell you. Yeah. No, but I mean, completely right. And Michael, it's not really that it's not perhaps really that one thinks that, oh, it's a capability that I don't know I have. It might rather be one that it's a capability that really hasn't rewarded me in the past to exercise. You know, like that shoulder muscle, you know, whatever, pectorals. I don't have enough time to exercise it. And then time goes by, and then at some point I'm looking at all the and go, yeah, may as well exercise that muscle. It will be useful.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, now that the doctorate's done, I not only can I have to spend time on exercising this muscle because, you know, more project work to do. Mr. Paul.
Just was going to mention, I put it in the chat, maybe over obvious, but you know, the GTD methodology would work perfectly for what you're talking about. You know, you have inbox, you have projects, you have 10,000 feet, 20,000 feet, 30,000 feet. You could have adornments or smart groups for all of that, and just start throwing things as they occur to you into the inbox, even with the drafts, you know, on your phone. I play with this a little bit, and it's really appealing. I keep getting sucked back into using OmniFocus, but where I really want all my data and information to live is in Tinderbox because I can do more with it. So right. GTD is a nice methodology.
Actually, I was going to respond to that, Paul, on that point of GTD, especially in that book particularly. One of the things that Paul Allen constantly goes back, David Allen goes back to constantly, is the review, the concept of review.
Yeah.
That you must spend time, which again speaks to what Mark Anderson is saying. You must spend time going over all those notes you made, or you're not gaining the full value from them.
Yep.
Nice. And that's David Allen job, Getting Things Done. Is that it?
Yeah. Getting things done. Yeah.
It's a very little book.
Yeah, it'll change your life if you haven't been through it.
It definitely will. It's probably the book one should read before reading Tiago Forte's Second Brain.
Absolutely.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it inspired him as well.
What does that mean?
What? It inspired him as well in his journey to organization.
No, I heard inspired him. YHME. I'm like, what's the him? All right, it's like some kind of prayer. All right, inspired. Okay, got it. So you're saying Getting Things Done inspired Tiago?
Yeah. All these organization gurus will mention Getting Things Done, GTD, all the time.
Got it.
And it's pinned on this essential concept of like keep your mind free, mind flowing like water, which of course will appeal to you as a Buddhist. And the idea being that you don't retain anything that you have to do in your mind, in your brain, because that means you're blocking it up, preventing it from doing more valuable things. So as soon as you have an idea, you write it down. And then you find a place to place it. But the key element to close this loop is to review that note.
Yeah.
And then decide exactly where it goes and what you're going to do with it.
By the way, before I forget, Art, remember when you were traveling in India and you sent me that picture of the giant stupa you were at?
Yeah.
Last week, I was just invited to go speak in Bhutan in October. So
Very
based
nice.
on my dissertation research, they want me to go speak at a smart city conference they're having.
Very nice. I walked across the border to Bhutan last December. It was great.
Yeah, so I'm going to get 9 days there.
Wonderful. It's a beautiful, beautiful country.
It'll be fun. Hey, Mr. Chuck.
Yeah, so I was just going to maybe hopefully close this big discussion, but again, I apologize because I pointed out many times that the biggest database I deal with is 3 decades of email. But this whole conversation has brought me back to the 90s when probably many of us developed some bad habits around email when we were required to clean up our email boxes because there was, we were consuming too much storage and storage was expensive. And I can remember, I'll say circa 1998, being in a meeting and having people just around the meeting before it got started complaining about, the tension, the stress that came from having to clean up their email inboxes. I mean, a couple of people were late to the meeting because they had to do some email cleanup because they'd exceeded their capacity. And, I just observed everybody. I said, you know what? It's 1998. Yeah, our disk drives have actually approached, hundreds of megabytes. And we have lots of secondary storage we can use. Worrying about the cost of storage for email is stupid. And everybody sort of around the room just, yeah, it is sort of stupid. I said,
Yeah.
Why not just keep letting it collect and, organizing it as best you can? But, should you ever need it, our computers are fast enough to search it.
Right.
And it's interesting how, several people later commented to me how that was a significant moment in their thinking about this because it just reduced so much stress to stop worrying about cleaning up email boxes.
Yeah.
And again, I think I still see people today who have that stress. And I think it's an indicative aspect of, we've been thinking about how to use technology wrong. Maybe one of the things that's great about technology is it allows us to collect all this junk and not worry about it until we need it. And then we can search for it. So
I had a client, an insurance company, and because of liability issues, they purged every email every 60 days. So you ended up with this giant corporate amnesia.
Yep.
I mean, it was absolutely horrific. And part of the reason why they kept me on as a consultant actually is because I was a consultant. I wasn't obligated to purge emails because I took on the liability of
so I've been there too with that. I mean,
the vice president of the company would say, "Remember that email I sent you from 6 months ago? Can you give it back to me? Because I don't have it anymore."
It's also against the law. You need to have discovery capability for a corporation.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Who of us is able to remember the phrase email inbox bankruptcy?
Yes. Frightening.
You declare bankruptcy and just delete everything.
Mr. Bernstein, how are we doing? You ready?
We got it. Okay. I guess we want desktop 2. Okay. It's not particularly pretty, but it's not in bad shape. So first thing, we need to copy from numbers.
Well, Mark, wouldn't you mind before, can you give a preamble of what posters are first? So someone that happens to be watching this
Sure.
Can kind of get a sense of that.
Well, but let me do that second.
Okay.
What we have is some tabular data. And we've got some names and various things, time, treasure, and talent. And we want to get that into Tinderbox and explore it. And so what we do is we make a container, go into it, we paste, and here's my new container. Here's the data, and we have one note for each element, each line of the table. And we have key attributes for the new attributes of time, treasure, and talent. And we will take those and just put them in the container, get rid of the envelope, and we're done. So that was easy enough. And here I've already done that. Now, what we want to do is use a visualization library for the web that called Plotly, which is one of a number of fairly complicated libraries that are cushioning an even more complicated library called D3 that does just about everything you might want to do in terms of visualization. But there are others. There's one from Google. There's what's the other one I'm forgetting? Google Charts, Chart.js. There's a bunch of these. So if you have a visualization that you've seen on the web, you can find it. Okay, I made a new document here called X Meetup. I'll upload this. And I loaded up the built-in hints and the template folder and things like that. Okay, then I went to the Tinderbox example file for posters and grabbed a poster that didn't seem to be anything like the poster I want, but it uses the same library. And I grab all these notes and I copy it over into my document. Now, when I copied it here, nothing much happened, because if we look at this, just this note, bring up the inspector, we see that this uses a template called T_Plotly, and that doesn't exist in my document, so I'll copy that over too. Still nothing. Okay, let's look at T_template. Don't copy stuff that you don't understand. Look at it, and then you'll understand it. So we've got a template here, and what it's doing is saying, oh, make a div called tester, and then do whatever is in the text of the note as a script. So that's straightforward enough. We'll go look at the text. And here we get a variable that refers to our particular piece of the DOM. And now we do an action. My data equals the data node of data. Whoops. This is a function call. I'm going to need a function. So I go and I see this data for charts. And here is the function data node. So I copied this and some other relevant functions into the library of my new document from the library I copied it out of. This is really the only one I'm doing. And what it says is, if I ask for a data note and I give it a piece of a name, I look at all the notes that are connected to this, this note, and I look for the first note that has this string as part of its name. So I can ask for the data note with style in its name and the data note with data in its name. And here, of course, we have the data note with the data in its name and the data note with the style in its name. Now, this is just copied from the Plotly sample page, and it says things like show legend equals false. Wonder what happens if we show legend equals true. Ah, okay. We would rather have that say time or treasure than trace zero, but we'll figure that out. So we ask you to do something that they call a scatter polar chart, which, okay, radial scatter polar, fine. We want lines and markers. We could get rid of the lines. We could get rid of the markers. We have values of r and theta, the distance from the center and the angle. Okay, the angle looks scary, but it's pretty straightforward. I want to collect all the children of my data, that is my data note. And for each child, I want to collect the sibling order times 30 degrees. So that'll go 0, 30, 60, and so forth. I'm taking advantage of just knowing how many data points there are, but it's fairly easy to replace that with with looking at the container and counting the children. Similarly, for R, I just do the same thing, and I ask for the value of treasure for each note. And the rest of this is just describing how to do the various pieces. Then I do the same thing with the style note. Style is saying things like, how big should the fonts be? And at some point, I would really rather label this axis with names rather than with the angles, but we'll sort that out. I ran out of time before I could find it in the Plotly documentation, but surely it's there. And presumably, if I want to turn it in the other direction, I can. So that's a start. The key thing is to find, here's the Plotly JavaScript library, and I didn't see the radial chart at first glance in their samples, so I searched for radial, and then I got something that seemed to say polar scatter plots, and eventually I got this page, which is probably the page we want. And so if I wanted to look at time instead, I simply replace that. And now I have the same chart for time. Yep. There's much still to be done, but that's mostly sorting through the Plotly documentation and setting a couple of options. So that should do the job.
Yep. Very helpful. And it's great to break out into the individual pieces into separate notes so that you can, use it as a cookbook, so to speak.
Yeah. The key here is it's just look at HTML view, like select the note and look at the HTML that's being exported. And if you can, in fact, say, I'm not sure what this is doing. I can just put a section in here where I do that and look at it in the HTML. And okay, this is what that line does. That's the results. So this is a little bit strange for those of us accustomed to programming because you don't usually put diagnostic rights in the middle of your program in quite this way, but there's no harm in it.
And also, I'm not sure if you pointed this out, but for Paul's reference, if you open the data container and you switch to table mode, you'll see the data in the same tabular form that you saw it in numbers as.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Isn't that cool?
Yep. Beautiful. Well, this is definitely worth going through offline and kind of absorbing it. But then you can apply it to all kinds of charts, anything you can find in the library.
I'd pick up one thing though, because thinking back to the thread that Paul had opened in the forum, and you'd caught on the reference to sort of making an installer. One of the things actually that came along with posters coming in was some enhancements to action code that allowed you to do some of the things like making attributes. So installer in this case really means probably some code you'll write yourself. So what we've seen here is sort of the first thing is making the exemplar. Now you know all the things that you needed to get. You can then start to make a manifest. So if you go to another document, say, right, to make a radar chart, I'm going to need, I'm going to need these things. And for instance, I might need to have a little library note that I put in that has a function that goes through and makes 3 or 4 attributes I might need, and so on. So it's not talking about installers in terms of a little program that you sort of just run and it does all the magic for you. It's more something that you or the forum to help you would make, so that you can reproduce this in another document. That's the intention. But the first time around the buy, you're basically going to have to reverse it out from the web example you've seen, make one, and then you'll know that then effectively you'll have the manifest that you can automate to the degree that you need, if that makes sense.
Yep, exactly. And that's fun work.
Yeah, Mr. Bernstein, can you upload that poster sample file to the chat so I can add it?
I can. Here is, yeah. Stay tuned.
It's probably worth having both
Yep.
your demo now and the one you borrowed from, because people may forget where that is.
Strikes me that this is a spectacular example of how spreadsheets are the lingua franca cross generations. I mean, I deal with or talk with undergraduates when I ask them, do you consider yourself to be a programmer when you're working in Excel? And they clearly take insult. It's fun.
I think the step up from that though is working with the data tables, which is what I learned from tinkering around with things like R, because I'm quite surprised. I'm working with as it happened, a chemistry group at the moment, and I'm always shocked by the casual use of Excel, knowing the damage it does to data for the inattentive person. It's nobody's fault. It's just the way the things grew. But I would say friends don't let friends use spreadsheet. If you really care about it, stick it under the data table where it won't get accidentally munged.
Yeah. Okay, what other topics do we have for today? Who else is working on a project? No, I don't really have anything extra for you myself, just because I've been so focused on getting my other project done, but I will be back to normal form next week. Bill Schuerman, you've been quiet. What have you been working on lately?
Nothing exactly new, just working on setting up classes for fall and setting up a couple of tinderboxes for a couple of manuscripts, but nothing really super exciting to this group.
Okay, we lost Wintrese too. Have you made any progress on your assignment rubric methodologies? or has that not evolved much? It looks like he lost audio. Okay. Well, there's no harm in ending early if we don't have any other topics to discuss. Anything new on your end, Mr. Anderson, that you've been working on?
No, I've been in proceedings creation hell at the moment. And discovering things like, even in 2025, people are building databases that can't cope with accented names. Killer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if we, I mean, if y'all want, we can continue to chat, or if we want to, or we can end the call early. What would you guys like to do?
I just want to make a parting comment. You know, I remember full well the days when storage was expensive and we had to get rid of it, and it's changed now that it's so cheap that we keep everything. And I think that's a pendulum shifting the other way, where we just keep everything for years and years, and there's value in purging. And I just, you know, I see it in my physical, I purge my closet, you know, that's not data, but it's healthy. And it, it means less to look through. And, you know, I know in computers it's instantaneous almost. But I just think for our sanity, sometimes it's good to purge.
Yeah.
So I just had that thought to share.
Strongest agreement, particularly, oh, sorry, Mark.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Strongest agreement, because basically that library behind me is pretty much the process I had to do when my father died. And it's quite unpleasant on getting rid of all this stuff. You have no idea what's important and what's not. And it's even worse digitally, because you have the right passwords. There's going to be a mini industry on what to do with Dad's digital, the great American novel.
Of course, that progresses to the next step is what is whoever comes after us going to do with our great American novel too.
Yep. All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you. Hopefully for those in the US, you can enjoy the 4th next weekend.
You got a couple more hands.
Oh, more hands.
Steve, want to say
something.
Paul and Steve, don't cut them off.
No, not at all.
At the risk of bringing up another lengthy project or topic, I don't want to do that, but I just want to say one of the things that I've learned over a couple of years now, both these meetups and actively using more and more Tinderbox, is the importance of a structure of your Tinderbox file. And I have moved towards this, using the same structure in every file, and it has superbly helped me in organizing my data. I always start out with a README note, which kind of explains everything that I hope to do within this this particular document. Then I follow it up with a project design note, which is relatively new for me, where I just either in map form or in outline form lay out all the things I intend to do and the steps I intend to follow, and move on from that. And then I start to work those steps and build notes after that. And I tell you, this has helped me be so productive with Tinderbox, having a structure that I always start out with, that I just thought it would be worth mentioning.
Yeah, no, I agree. But then also remember, don't get too deer in the headlights and not move forward until your structure is done. You know, it's that incremental formalization. Because structure also evolves.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, Mr. Anderson.
Just to say, riffing on the things moving along. So I was very lucky to win out some prize money with a paper last year, which led to this. So that's a 4 terabyte SSD disk on a sort of Thunderbolt or a USB-C cable, and it's put in perspective that what that has on it is some of the work, continuation of the work I did in my thesis. So that is 10 different Wikipedias complete. Without back edits, but basically it's the monthly dump, one of the monthly dumps. so I can run longitudinally. So I can now run every year from 2016 through to 2024. And the other interesting thing is this on my Mac M1 Pro compared to a sort of the top end 2015 MacBook Air. The same Python scripts run in about, I think it's about somewhere in the region of sort of, they take about a third the time they used to. I mean, I do think it's amazing. I can download the whole of Wikipedia and stick it on a disk sort of thing and do stuff to it in an amount of time that isn't sort of months or weeks. So yeah, that just puts that in perspective. And another interesting thing I happened to find, I think Mark's dropped off, but reminded that Doug Engelbart planned his augment paper using McBee edge sort cards. I find for all of a few pounds, the wonderful Punch Cards second edition that came from a university library and was taken out once and was used so little that some of the pages still weren't properly cut. But it's been worth it for the couple of chapters in the front, actually, sort of just explaining some missing bits about edge sort cards for the 2 or 3 other people on the planet who may find a need for that info. So there is something out there. Thanks.
So what Mark Bernstein illustrated, I think, and this is not in any way a criticism, but it illustrated a gap that we have in that Mark Bernstein had an intimate knowledge of what he had and what was missing and how to explore it. With anything that's really complex like that, it's good to have that knowledge. I don't know what the solution is, or what the final solution is, but I think it would be very helpful to have self-contained kinds of documents that work, and people could download those and then adjust the data, see how it affects the poster, adjust some code, see how it adjusts the poster. Start with something that's working. Starting with something that isn't working and trying to figure out what is not working, as Mark was illustrating, is very hard and requires a lot of intimate knowledge of the inner workings of it. So maybe as a community, we can come up with some solutions, maybe some starter files or something like that for some of these posters, so people have some place to begin that actually works, rather than pulling pieces and parts from things and trying to figure out why it isn't working.
I'm just going to interject myself. This is where Michael Becker's wonderful videos kind of come in to that. I'm not asking him to do any more work, but those that's how I started, with following the examples that Michael put up on YouTube. So I think that heads in the direction of what you're looking for, Steve. Again, not asking Michael to make a video on posters, but that sort of thing like that has just been amazingly helpful. So
yeah, now that the doctorate's done, I'll be able to do more. I had to kind of pause on those for a while just to get the thing finished. But yeah, thank you for that.
I would also point out that just like the information that we've been talking about earlier, is that there's so much of this content already available on the forums, on the meetups. And if anything, it's a matter of sort of marshalling and organizing all that data, maybe in a Tinderbox project file, so that we can find and track it easily. And the other point was that, I think because of this sort of, there's a dichotomy of knowledge, in the sense that the top 4 or 5 Tinderbox users on the group and the forum know so much that if they're presented with a new problem, they will sort of figure out the logic pathways and pull bits of code from here and there, because they already have a present, like a cooking knowledge of the app. And many of us others basically sort of have to figure our way out to it. But I always welcome that opportunity, because it's like a way to learn how to learn. And I try to figure it out myself. And then if I fail, I can always count on the resources or just throw up a question on a subsequent meetup.
Mr. Peterson.
Following up on the thing of demos, I think I can speak with some authority on this. I mean, a genuine problem in the provision of those resources is that the OS evolves, the app evolves, and our use of it, of all these things evolve. So those who've been long-term players of this game may remember the demo bank that it used to be, and I rewrote it all for version 5 to version 6 when all the windowing methods changed. But as I went through it, I realized a lot of these were basically solutions to problems we no longer have. Or you can't post to Twitter from a Tinderbox file like you could in 2009. So funnily enough, and this isn't a riposte to the suggestion. Funnily enough, the best way to get these sort of demos in play, actually, I genuinely think, is to ask in the forum. Come up with a problem, and the forum will, like us not, be able to sort it. And one of the things that will arise is a demo file. There is sort of an issue about whether there's a repository, but you actually get back to the same thing, that by the time you need it again, probably it needs rewriting. So a massive change, for instance, in the last, probably, I don't know how long ago it was, but let's say the last year or so, was the arrival of functions that make things we used to have to do, involving complete handstands and thousands of attributes and sort of things in the background, working as variables, we can now do with file as code. And so we can actually write smaller, not necessarily simpler for the learner, but things that just work and are easier to use. And so, funnily enough, I mean, so I think the support is there. Actually, in a way, in this community, as in one or two others, but not many, where the repository is asking the question and essentially getting something that's pretty tailor-made to what you're doing. Because the other part of the working problem, and I know this myself from when I've been trying to do actually the very sort of web visualizations that we've just been looking at, is I go to somewhere, I see the thing that is just what I want, but the one bit it never explains is how the data is connected, or indeed what shape the data has to be. So, I've got this data here. I want it to look like the picture, but there's a gap in between. And so again, I think that's something where, funnily enough, a community like the forum actually helps a lot. I say it's counterintuitive because it's in our nature to think, well, I shouldn't have to ask about this because A, it must have been done before, and why do I have to go and look? But funnily enough, I think if you have a community where people are quite used to folk asking questions, it's my reflection on the 20 odd years of it through about 3 different types of forums, it's actually remarkably effective. So the answer really to the repository is it exists. It just doesn't exist as a bunch of files. So I hope that doesn't appear like a riposte to the observation, which I think is entirely sensible. It's just that the commodity exists in a place you might not think, and taking in context all those videos that Michael's done. But again, since he started doing those videos, there have been quite a few changes, and it'll be a real labor of love to go back and do all those again. So, because in effect, you'd be probably redoing them about once a year.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of time.
And that's just in the fundamental changes of the tool, not to mention fixing your mistakes or your new efficient methodologies about going about doing things, or new approaches you've tried. That's where it really gets, I find it gets really squirrely. It's like what Kim was saying at the very beginning of the call. You go back to your dissertation a year later and you're like, oh my God, that's crap. You never want to read it again.
Don't do it. Don't go back.
Yeah, don't go back. Same thing with the demos, right? You go back a year later and you're like, what was I thinking, right?
Yeah. And in fact, not obsessively updating past things that may or may not necessarily hold to the future. One thing it does do is actually free up time to deal with real problems that people have now in current systems. So again, there is actually some win from not doing these things.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't feel like that. Anyway, I hope that was an even-handed response.
There are exactly 4 people who read dissertations, the writer and the review committee. That's it.
And your
very
mum,
true.
even if she doesn't understand it.
Sometimes not the review committee.
Not the review committee for sure. Yeah. Okay. Any other last comments, thoughts, ideas, questions, projects for the future? Otherwise, all right.
Good job.
Okay, guys. Well, thank you very much. Enjoy today. This was fun. We'll talk to you later.
Have fun. Thanks.